It's not every lawyer who can say they've changed the deeply embedded pattern of discrimination on Wall Street, but the law firm of Moody Warner won that right for 2,700 women and won it big against the investment giant Morgan Stanley. Everybody knows that sexism exists on Wall Street. Everybody knows that women on Wall Street had to be better and work harder than their male counterparts to get ahead. Everybody knows that very few women hold positions of real power or earn top dollars on Wall Street. And everybody knows that the old boys club atmosphere persists on Wall Street. Complaining about gender discrimination against your employer can be the kiss of death for your job and your career. The issue of women's rights, not in the sense of special kinds of human rights reserved for women, but in the sense of the equal enjoyment by women of their general human rights, remains an important one. The Universal Declaration and the Human Rights Treaties forbid discrimination on the grounds of gender. Article 2 states that everyone is entitled to all rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind. Article 7 states that all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. This means that the anti-discrimination rule goes beyond discrimination in the application of human rights. If everyone is entitled to equal protection by the law, then it means there can be no law which discriminates. Every law which offers unequal protection to men and women is a violation of the Universal Declaration, whether or not this law seeks to protect human rights. More progress has been made for women, but most women continue to work in jobs stereotyped as female jobs. And women in nearly all job categories receive less pay than males in those same job categories. Women face limits on promotion to high-level management positions because of conscious and subconscious sex bias, and continue to experience sexual harassment on the job despite increased employer awareness of an employer's responsibility and obligation to take preventive and corrective action. Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines to show you how Chris Moody and Whitney Warner, partners at the law firm of Moody Warner, helped Wall Street women win $70 million against Morgan Stanley in this landmark settlement to safeguard and promote the rights of women on Wall Street, and how this settlement sends a message to other Wall Street firms that discrimination will not be tolerated. Achieving this goal is necessary if the American workplace is to reflect American values of fairness and equal opportunity. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the law firm of Moody and Warner. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Chris Moody and Whitney Warner to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are primarily a law firm that specializes in employment law, right?
That's correct.
But tell us, you also represent employers sometimes as well as employees. Tell us a little bit about your practice.
Well, we started off representing employers. Historically, that's what we did. But we got more and more interested in representing employees as we went along. Not only because it's an interesting practice and hopefully you can do some good, but you can bring some interesting cases and make some interesting law. So we're doing more and more of that.
Now, this case that we're going to talk about today, the Morgan Stanley case, it was ultimately approximately a $70 million settlement. It took 2 years. Tell our audience a little bit about, it involved a lot of people, 2,700 women. Tell our audience what happened, what was going on at Morgan Stanley that this whole case developed in the first place?
Well, I think what was going on at Morgan Stanley was what was going on at a lot of other companies like that. It had always been a man's world, and it remained a man's world. It's all about money in that business, and the men traditionally had the clients and therefore made the money, and were resistant to changing the way they operated.
I understand that when new leads would come in, this was one of the issues involved, that they would be distributed amongst the males rather than the women, correct?
Yes, there were some ways that they had of going about doing that. They had sort of a fat get fatter and the thin get thinner method of distributing accounts. So the person who had the most assets under management, for example, would get the largest account of set of account distributions. And then the next largest producer would get the next largest account, and so on. And so it really just perpetuated a history of discrimination because the women were never in a position to get the biggest accounts.
Right.
So they'd get the smallest accounts, or the ones that were more trouble than they were worth to manage, and end up having to spend a lot of time on a small valued account.
Now, we're here in Albuquerque, which is not one of the major metropolitan centers of the United States, and yet you were involved in a major case that happened in Wall Street. How did you guys get involved with this case?
Well, we started off by representing one financial advisor in Santa Fe.
And what did this financial advisor, when she came to you, she said exactly what?
She said that she had worked for Morgan Stanley and that she had been discriminated against and retaliated against there. So we investigated it and resolved her case.
When she said she had been discriminated against, she was not getting what? What was she not?
Well,
how was she not being treated?
Just like the people we later ended up representing, she was not getting accounts. She was being cut out of new accounts that came in, or when a broker left and accounts were distributed, she was not getting those.
And she would go to her manager, right? She obviously went to her manager.
Sure.
What was her manager's response?
This is the way we do it, and we're not changing it.
You settled that case, correct?
Yes.
With a local office of Morgan Stanley, or what?
Yes.
Okay. And as a result of that, other women started coming to you, correct?
Right.
And they had similar complaints?
Very similar.
Similar issues.
In fact, we were struck by how similar they all were. And since everyone we were talking to, and we started really in Colorado. We ended up talking with a bunch of people in Colorado, and then it kind of spread from there. But what struck us was everybody we were talking to pretty much had the same complaints. And that means you're talking a company-wide problem.
Tell us a little bit about how long it took to settle this case and how many people you actually interviewed. I think you interviewed a lot, didn't you?
We did. In the course of going through the case preparation and also the settlement discussions lasted about 2 years. And in that process, we interviewed hundreds, 200 or so, female financial advisors of the company, both current and former employees. And as Chris said, we were struck over and over again by how similar their stories were, whether they were in Michigan or Florida or Connecticut or Colorado. It was the same pattern, the same story over and over.
Why does the settlement talks take so long? What happened during these 2 years?
Well, we were trying to negotiate two things in the settlement. One was a very broad package of systemic or programmatic relief to change the way that the company was doing business. We needed to overcome the historical bias that was woven into their business practices. And secondly, of course, we needed to negotiate the financial remedy and relief for the class members.
You have other cases now against some other financial institutions, and I think a lot of our audience, and especially I, would like to know, when you say you're trying to change things at a company, who do you deal with in these settlement talks? Are you dealing with their general counsel and their outside law firm?
Yes, oftentimes we have general counsel and outside firm. They always have outside counsel. And we'll have usually a high-level person in the business side of things as well, because we're talking about changing their business practices.
So do you have conferences where you sit down and talk with them and say, these are the changes we'd like to see happen?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And what's their immediate response usually? We'll look into it?
Their immediate response
We'll consider it?
Usually their immediate response is, we're not going to do anything plaintiff's counsel wants us to do.
Or we can't
Wait a minute.
do it.
That's what comes out of the general counsel?
They put
or a high-level business person?
They put it more to the effect of, well, we'll think about what you have to say, but at the end of the day, we don't want outside counsel, especially from your side of the table, telling us how to run our business.
Okay. There were some changes that were implemented, some pretty drastic changes, correct?
That's right.
So how do you get from we're not going to have you tell us how to run our business to making these changes?
That's what takes so long, because it is a long process. They initially say we don't want to do it, or we can't do it, or both. And so it just takes time to work through those issues, to explain how it can be done, and to make some progress at explaining why it should be done. And eventually you have to get some high-level person in the company involved or it's not going to happen.
What is the highest level person that you got involved with Morgan Stanley?
The principal contact there who was involved in all the mediation sessions was a special counsel, the senior counsel for employment matters, who reported directly to the CEO of that company.
So you never talked with the CEO about this,
No.
did you? But you got obviously feedback through him.
Yes.
As a result of this settlement, which I think in cash was like $46 million or something like that, $7 million allocated of their own money. Where did they get that number, by the way, of coming up? We're going to spend $7.5 million of implementing the changes. How do you know the value of that? Because they told you?
Well, I mean, to some extent you have to take that on trust, right?
Okay. And I guess taxes on the money that they paid these employees. Did many of these 2,700 women continue to work at Morgan Stanley?
I think many of them did.
They did?
Yeah.
And would you say the atmosphere at Morgan Stanley today is a better working atmosphere for women today?
We certainly hope it is, and I think it is. I mean, I think whenever you're talking about changing the culture at a large company, it's a slow process. It doesn't happen overnight, so it happens in little baby steps, and I think we took some steps.
What are the important, significant changes that Morgan Stanley is supposed to implement as a result of this settlement?
Well, they have additional training that they're required to do. They have changed...
Training in what sense?
Training for their managers regarding discrimination issues in the workplace.
Yeah.
Training for the employees regarding how to make complaints, what the process is supposed to be like. They have a different way that they're supposed to distribute their equal employment opportunity policies. We tried to affect a way that they distribute accounts. We've had some input on how partnerships are formed between financial advisors. And I think some of the key issues in the Morgan Stanley case are the outside experts that we have overseeing the implementation of the settlement to make sure that they're complying with all the terms that they're to comply with.
Who are these outside experts?
Well, there's a couple of industrial psychologists, well-known industrial psychologists. And
who are they paid by?
Morgan Stanley.
Okay.
And there's a settlement monitor who is a lawyer.
Do they report to the court, or do they report to plaintiff's counsel, or who do they report to?
They're paid by the company, and they report to plaintiff's counsel.
So you get reports from these people. How often?
I'm not sure exactly how often the reports are. They're at least twice a year.
Yeah. As a result of this case, though, in settling this, and you were one of 3 law firms that settled, it's a major step forward. In fact, as I did my research, I think this was the 2nd class action that they settled, which is a gender class action case in the last, 6 years or something like that. Other female financial advisors have come forward in saying they're treated the same unfair way, right?
Yes.
That's good. Let's talk a little bit about class actions and discrimination. Who can file a discrimination case?
Well, any employee who feels like they've been discriminated against on the basis of sex, race, national origin, age, disability can file.
Before lawyers get involved, someone's at a company. A woman is at a company. She feels she's being discriminated against. What is her proper channel of filing a complaint?
It depends on the company, and we usually recommend that they try the internal processes.
Filing a complaint with whom?
Before filing a complaint with an outside agency like the EEOC or the state agency that handles discrimination and harassment types of claims, most large companies especially will have an internal process. It either involves going to the Human Resources Department or trying to work the issue up through the chain of management.
What do? They write a letter to Human Resources?
There's different ways depending on the company. Sometimes it's just a phone call. Sometimes there's a form they have to fill out. Sometimes it's a narrative, an email. Some places have a hotline or an anonymous ethics number that they can call. But most companies, I should say, the first step they want you to take is try to work it out with the supervisor. And in most cases, that's the person who's causing the problem.
People are human beings, right? You're going to the person who's causing you a problem.
Right.
And you're saying, I have a problem with you. Obviously, because they're a human being, they take offense at this.
Yes.
And they feel that, wait a minute, who are you to tell me how to do my job, right? So then another word pops up, which is called retaliation. A lot of people don't want to complain against their supervisor because they're going to be retaliated against.
It's true,
So
unfortunately.
what happens next? And can a company, by the way, people are terminated, aren't they?
They are.
But what happens, what is the safest bet for an employee that feels that they're being discriminated against? Like you see with these female financial advisors. What's the safest way and the most effective way? Just make everyone aware of the company, that you have a problem? Not just one person?
Yeah,
not your immediate supervisor?
That's a difficult question to answer, and it tends to depend on who the particular players are and the organization and how it's set itself up. In some organizations, I've seen that the best way to actually get the problem to stop is to talk maybe to the person who's engaging in that conduct. Again, depends very much on who that person is and whether or not they're going to be receptive and whether or not they are maybe doing things accidentally.
Yeah.
At a company and even in an industry like Wall Street, where you're dealing with decades of tradition, going to that branch manager, who's usually the person making the tough decisions, you're up against a brick wall. They're not going to change the way they're doing things because you bring it to their attention.
Right. What about time limits in filing a case of discrimination? What are the time limits involved?
Well, it's important to act as quickly as you can. You should not delay, but there are some legal time limits.
Well, I mean, take these cases of the Morgan Stanley financial advisors. I mean, this was an ongoing problem.
And when it's an ongoing problem, it makes it especially difficult. When do you complain? And I guess everybody has a different answer to that. They have to get to the point where it's bad enough they want to complain.
So are you saying that if you work there for 10 years, and you put up with it, you have no right to complain?
Well, you don't have, it's not that you don't have a right to complain, but there may be limits on how far back you can go once you do complain.
So in other words, to cover a period of time in case you win a lawsuit.
Right.
You mentioned the EEOC. What is that?
That's the federal agency that investigates and oversees enforcement of claims brought under Title VII, which is of the Civil Rights Act, the AIDS Discrimination in Employment Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Okay.
So there are very different forms of discrimination that they cover.
How does it operate?
Well, it's a large federal agency. It's got offices all over the country, in most major and in a lot of minor cities. And the way typically it operates is you'll either call them up, if you're not in a town where they have an office, and explain the situation, and they'll send you a charge form to fill out. Or if you happen to be where they have an office, you go in and fill out a charge form, which is a one-page document, provide additional documentation, and then they'll take that and they'll send it to the employer, which is always a sticking point because then the employer knows about it and can retaliate if they're of a mind to do that. But they investigate the charge.
When do you come to that point where you go to the EEOC? After you've failed in any effort to try to resolve your problem yourself as your own company, right?
Well, once the employee has tried the internal processes and either found that they were getting nowhere, it wasn't being taken seriously, or that retaliation has started, is usually the time that they go to the EEOC. And in most cases, you have 300 days to file your claim. It can be different in different states, but the majority of times, and in New Mexico, it's 300 days.
How is sex discrimination defined?
Well, sex discrimination is something where the employee is treated differently because of their sex. So, in other words, if not for the fact that she's a woman, she would not be treated in the same way.
So your legal strategy, as with all law firms, you were prepared to go to court, weren't you? You were prepared to take this to trial, right?
Yes.
Where would this have been tried, by the way?
The case was filed in the district in Washington, D.C. There was an agreement among the parties, including the defendant, that would be the jurisdiction in which it was filed. Would it actually have been tried there is a little uncertain.
In this particular case, when it finally came down, when did you know it was going to settle?
It looked like it was going to settle, I would say, towards the end of 2006. There were some discussions with the company that resulted in the settlement.
That must have been a happy day for you and your clients.
It was a happy day. We were pleased to be sort of at the end of the settlement discussion road.
Right.
There are a lot of processes that have to take place even after the settlement is reached, though. You have to go through the court and get it approved.
Right.
There are competing cases, perhaps, that the court has to address. Are they going to be rolled into this class, or are they going to be separate cases?
As a final note, let me just say that without lawyers like yourself who fight for the little guy would be trampled left and right? Do you see permanent changes in some of the industries with some of these programs that they're required, like Morgan Stanley, required to implement so that it's better for female financial advisors?
I think you see some changes. You know, we negotiated some very specific changes,
Yeah.
so those changes have been implemented. That doesn't change people's minds and the way they react to other people.
Right.
But over time, I think that can make a difference.
Have you seen that other investment houses change maybe their policies? Because they follow these cases. They don't want to be sued next, right? Have you seen or evidence that they've made changes too, voluntarily?
I think we have, because we've undertaken some investigations within the industry. And sometimes when we start an investigation, the people that we talk to will say, you know, it used to be really bad, but it's gotten better. Or they perceive it as being better than it used to be.
Well, I want to thank both of you for spending some time with us today, and congratulations on that case. I hope you win your next case like that, and I hope everybody that's watching this show, if they have a discrimination case like this, to contact you, because you obviously have a record of success that can do them good. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.